Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt. Welcome to the New Brick Workshop. Now, this video is a standalone video, but it's part of a series I'm making about building my new shed. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a simple door. And it's the sort of door that would be suitable for any outbuilding, a barn or a shed or so on. Now, my design is very simple, and I'll show you a little picture in the top left-hand corner here. And it consists mainly of 4x2 prepared timber, planed all round. And then the main field at the front will be tongue groove board like this. And all of this comes from my local wood yard. Now, even the very best wood yards, when they prepare their planed all round wood, they'll put it away on various shelves and so on. It will dry out, it will change its moisture content, and it will change shape slightly. So you can never assume that wood that you buy, which is planed all round, is necessarily absolutely square and nice. So my first stage is to cut my main parts of the timber, that's the two side pieces in the top, approximately to size, and then to true it up. And I'm truing it up on my jet planing machine here. This is in planing mode, and in a minute I'll flip it over into thicknessing mode. Now, I've made a start, and I've created a flat face on this piece and also a square edge. So these two are known good edges. And once I've done that, I can then put it through the thicknessing and get the other two faces, which are parallel to those two, absolutely spot on. Now, I've actually already put these through the planer once to get a flat face. I'm now just about to do the edges of these two long pieces to get that side, which is absolutely square to that flat face. This is my known good face, and that's going up against the fence here. And I'm just going to put it through nice and gently, making sure it's up against that fence at all times. And always use a push stick, so never any risk. And I'm happy with that. Now, you can, if you're not absolutely confident in the setup of your planer, always just check, and I can tell you that is absolutely square. And so I'm going to mark this now. So that's my reference edge. So I've got a face side and a face edge. Now, I've had loads and loads of questions about the propelling pencils that I use. This is a Bic 2mm clutch pencil, and you press the end and you can set the lead to any length that you want. Sometimes having it on the long side to get in a little hole to make a mark is a good idea. But they're made by Bic, and I get mine from a company in the UK called Cult Pens, and they're the least expensive of anyone, much cheaper than Amazon or eBay and all the rest of it, and they're really good, very efficient company. So I'm now in thicknessing mode, and I'm going to do my first pass using this reference edge here on the bed of the planer to take off a bit on this edge here. And I'm going to do the same operation now for all three pieces of wood. Now, I've cut the main components to the right size, and I'm just having a dry run at the layout just to make sure I've cut things to the right size and that my idea of a plan is right. But at this stage, let me just name the parts. If you imagine the top of the door is up there, and I've got a hinge side and I've got the lock side here. Now, we call these two vertical pieces stiles. And the pieces that run across could be called rails or sometimes ledges, depending what type of design you're doing. Technically, this is a ledge and brace door, because I'm going to have diagonal pieces which go diagonally across in two places down towards the hinge side. More of that later. So I'm now going to just put this last horizontal piece, which we'll call it a rail, in place, and then I'm going to do some checking. And all I'm doing is popping it in place and then doing it up with a clamp, making sure it is where I want it to be. Now in theory, even though it's a dry run, this should be square, and I'm just going to check it just to see if it's very far out. Look, you wouldn't believe me if I said that's spot on. It is absolutely spot on. I'm going to prove it to you right now. And there it is, absolutely perfect. Now I've made up these pieces here which go in between the rails. Now if you imagine on the other side we've got the tongue and groove going on, and it's going on the face of these rails, but at the sides there's nothing for it to go up against, and so I'm providing these pieces which I'm going to glue and screw in place, which will give the edges of that tongue and groove a key or a reference. Now at this stage I'm not putting glue on the ends because these pieces haven't been fixed. I've got to mark for the dominoes on those, and also for the cross bracing. That's one done. 3 more to do. Now I'm lucky enough to have got both domino machines. I've had them for a very long time. They've really transformed my woodwork. Now if you didn't have a domino machine, you could adopt several different approaches. One is you could use a floating tenon concept using a router to do the mortises in both sides, and then make up a floating tenon of some description. You could do proper mortise and tenons, a little bit more laborious because of cutting the tenons. And maybe you could screw it from the sides. I don't know, it wouldn't be very elegant, but there are lots of other options. But by far the simplest and the quickest is to use dominoes. Now, contrary to popular belief, you do not need to measure everything up really accurately to place domino joints. All you need to do is make sure your framework is set up as you want it to be, held in place firmly, and then just randomly put lines where you want the dominoes to go, like so. And I'm not measuring, I'm just saying, right, this is where I'm going to put a domino. And that's fine. And so I've got those 2 dominoes, and whether they're a few millimeters either way, it doesn't matter. Now there is a slight difference. These dominoes here, which are 8mm dominoes and they're 100 millimeters long. Now these are going into a relatively narrow rail. So what I need to do is to make sure I get my spacing spot on. So these are the only ones I'm actually going to measure. And I reckon my centres from this edge should be 25 and 65. So 25 and 65 is what I'm going to do, and then to be consistent I'll use this absolutely brilliant marking gauge by Incra. This is the Incra Precision T rule, I think it's called. I got it from Woodworker's Workshop, and it is really good. I use it a lot, particularly when laying out domino work. So there are those, and those are the only ones I'm taking a huge amount of care with. And the rest I just mark up in a sort of random fashion. Well, not quite random, but you know, an intelligently random fashion. There we go. So that's where those dominoes go. And these, incidentally, are 6mm dominoes, and they're 40mm long, which is more than enough to hold these pieces in place and to make sure they're registered. The key thing about using dominoes on wider pieces like this is that they do make sure everything comes together nice and flush and tidy. Before I take all this apart to do the dominoes, I want to mark up for these pieces here, and also mark for some dominoes which I'm going to be doing with these. Now these are quite tricky because when you're doing a brace, first of all, always remember braces go down towards the hinge. The hinges are going to be on that side, so the braces are going down that way. But they're tricky because you've got to get the angle right, you've got to get the length right. And so I'm just getting this lined up, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to hold it in place and then mark it from the other side. A professional woodworking friend of mine, I said to him, "Oh, you could never have enough clamps, can you?" And these are little baby Bessie clamps. And he said, "No, you're right. I've got 150 of these." That's what he said to me. And he has. And if he's doing curved work, he tends to use loads and loads of them all over the place. Absolutely amazing. Right, well there's that held in place. And now what I'm going to do is very gingerly move this into a position so I can scribe underneath there. And I think if I move that like that, that should make it possible to get at this bit, and then I'll do the same for the other. Now I've made my best effort at scribing that from the other side. I don't know if it's going to be any good or not. We'll soon find out. Oh yeah, that looks reasonably clear. Now this really is when lasers on a saw come into their very own. Now this one fits there perfectly, and I'm just seeing how it is up here. And the answer is, it is jolly close. It's just a fraction too big, I think. So I can use this as a pattern for the next one. Right, that's now both of these fitted for size and shape. Now I am going to use a couple of dominoes on these. Really, it's only to keep them in this plane, and it's only really relevant during the gluing up process. And again, these are sort of random pencil lines. There's nothing special about them. So I suppose it's a bit of a risky moment, this. I'm taking off all these clamps which have been holding it together for a while, and hope I can get everything back in the right place when I've done the domino work. I'm sure it'll be fine. Now this is where you discover that I've stuck these pieces on, but I've got dominoes to go in here, here, and along here. So that's going to be interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I should have put those bits on later. Right, lesson learnt time, everyone. When you put these pieces on, put them in after you've done the domino cuts here. This glue's gone off now, so there's no way I can take those off. So I'm just going to have to rethink these joints here. Not to worry, not the end of the world. I'm okay with my big ones at the top of the frame, but it's all these intermediate ones. I'm just going to get the larger dominoes done. Now these dominoes themselves are 100mm long by 10mm thick, and so I've set this up so I've got 20mm depth of cut, because that's 40mm stock, so it's coming down halfway. I've got my depth going that way of 50mm, and I'm in the narrow setting. Now when you're doing deeper domino cuts, you will get some sawdust stuck in the end. I'll just tap it out. Right, well those are those big domino cuts done with the 10mm cutter. Now in order to overcome my bishop by not being able to use a normal domino because of these pieces I've stuck on, I've made up this piece. It's made of the same material there and a piece screwed on, and I'm using this to allow me to have a false front for my domino machine. And I'm using the big domino machine with its smallest cutter, which is 8mm, and I'm doing a depth of cut which takes into account this. And as you can see, I've now done a couple of these and it's working absolutely fine. Now 8mm is a little bit on the large side for the thinner stock. This is 20mm thick, and really 6mm would have been better, but it will work. Well, this is going to be a particularly interesting glue up. The reason is we've got domino joints which go this way and that way. Now my strategy is as follows. I'm going to put all of the dominoes into the rails, 1, 2, 3, 4, here, here and there. So that's both ends with the dominoes in. I'm then going to do the domino joints between these intermediate rails and the bracing pieces. That way we end up then with these 5 pieces of wood joined together but all wibbly wobbly. I'm then going to introduce this onto the main frame here with this rail at the top here as well, and then hopefully get the other end on. That's the theory anyway. We'll see. Now, these are the most difficult type of domino joint to do because the dominoes are at an angle to the main line of the stock. So you've just got to persevere and do your best. Now I have no clue what sort of nonsense I'm going to get into as I try and lift this onto there, but we shall see what happens. This bit goes in first. I need to get this in really well. Now then, this is the wiggly bit, really doubly wiggly. Okay guys, let's have a look. What have we got? What have we got? And this should... This is the sort of situation where you could really do with an apprentice. Now I've got this sort of held onto the bench, so what I'm now going to do is use a big clamp crossways. Right, I think that's enough for me to now be able to lay it down. No, that's all right. Well, that's it all clamped up. I was a fraction out of square, and so in order to sort that out, there's only a tiny bit. I've clamped it on this side, 3 clamps, and then I used that little clamp at the end there to drag that side down very slightly. And then I've clamped that side down, and that's now held in place, and everything is spot on. So I'm going to leave it now till the morning. Now, it's an absolute optimist who thinks that a door will fit the space it's going into first time. And I know this won't. So I'm not even going to go in that direction. But it's not far out. Right, as far as I can see, it's just very slightly tight on this edge here. I can't see from where I'm standing now how it is at the top, but it needs probably about 1 millimetre off this side here. And then I'm going to take a little bit off the bottom. And I'm going to take 2 millimeters off. That will give it a little bit of clearance at the bottom and the clearance it needs at the top. And meanwhile, I'll take 1 millimeter off this side from about here upwards. Do you remember the T-track from Axminster I mentioned a little while ago, and these lever clamps? Absolutely brilliant. I've got my mobile bench with its casters locked off, and that's now super. So I've been able to do the planing of the long side like this, and I'm just getting on to fitting the hinges on this side as well. Absolutely brilliant. Now I've cut out all of the tongue and groove, and I've done a trial fitting, and it all fits in really nicely. But I've decided that this inner edge all the way around on the frame, I'm just going to put a chamfer on that, and I'm going to do that now using my little router. Now remember, when you're using a router, that you should be cutting on an edge which is to your right and moving the router towards you. And that means if you're going round in a circle on the inside of something, you go round clockwise. If you're on the outside doing something, then you go round anti-clockwise. So you would be going round like this on the outside. But because I'm on the inside, I'm going in the opposite direction. Right, so we'll set up. So I'm going to be going round in a clockwise direction. And for a proper job, you need to just finish off the corners. Very easy to do. Good. So I'm just going to rough out the hinges with the router. I'll finish it off with the chisel, and I'm holding this in place as I demonstrated earlier using that T-track on this side of the bench. So I've set this up for the middle pair of hinges because they are different. Well, for about the last 8 days, we've had on and off rain, so I've had the shed covered over completely. But in the meantime, I got on with the door, and you can see the door frame and the bits of tongue and groove sitting there. I've given them a coat of a mixture of Sadolin and Ronseal. That's the Ronseal, which is the high Voc stuff that soaks into the wood really well. Good for preserving wood. So Sadolin, which is very expensive, and the Ronseal mixed together to make a slightly cheaper solution, and that's what I've put on both the frame and the tongue and groove for the door. Right, it's time now for me to put the tongue and groove into the door, but I need to know where I can safely use the staple gun to fix this onto the frame. Now I could draw pencil lines, but I don't really want to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a way of indicating the left and right of arc, as it were, for all these bits. So that tells me that line, that's where those two edges are. And that tells me where that edge is. That tells me where that edge is there. Ditto here. And that's it. So now I can judge where I can safely staple and actually hit a piece of wood behind. So I'm now going to just get my bits of tongue and groove in place. Incidentally, when I cut these, I've cut them a fraction short because I want the water to drip off the bottom and not have them soaking in a puddle of water that might accumulate at the bottom of the door. Now, in the old days, when I used to make doors, I used to use a steel ruler in between these joints just to keep them apart a little tiny bit to allow for expansion and contraction. But this wood I've got is actually relatively moist. So I'm not expecting it to expand very much at all. So I'm not doing that. Okay, I'm all set up, and I'm just going to make sure all my pieces are home as far as it goes at the top. And here's my straight edge. Now, that is the line of this bottom board, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to now judge along there and put a staple or two in. Now, I'm using my AT1532 nailer stapler for this. Now, I got this from Axminster a while ago. I've used it in quite a few videos so far, and it's never let me down. Works a treat, and it does both staples and nails. Right, so that's all the staples done. What I've done is I've put 2 rows on each of the 3 rails, and then on the bracing I've put 2 rows. Again, the bracing goes that way, one there, one there. They've got 2 rows, and that's more than adequate. I measured the moisture level of this wood when I got it, and it was quite moist, and so I'm not expecting it really to get much worse, particularly as I've got a good amount of saddling on there. Now, when it comes to fitting the door, always attach the hinges to the door first, and then after that you offer the door with its hinges up to the frame. And remember, when you're fitting the hinges, some hinges, like my top and bottom one, are handed so that the door side of the hinge has to be on the door side and the frame side on the frame side. And also make sure the hinges go in the slots you intended. So my hinges are numbered 1, 2, 3 and 4. And for these 4-inch butt hinges, I'm using some 5 by 30mm screws. It's quite common to use 4mm thickness screws, but mine will take the thicker 5s, and so I'm using these for a bit of added strength. Well, I rigged this up to support the door at this end, and I had a screw in my screwdriver, and I was able to get the first screw in at the top. While still holding the door, I then put a second screw in, and now that's reasonably secure. And I now want to put 1 screw in for each hinge on the frame side, and then I'm going to check it. Right, that's that. I can now see if it works. Oh, hey, not bad, eh? Now, in my trial fitting, what I did very first of all was to copy the locations of the hinges from the frame. Remember, I did the frame in the workshop, onto the door. I then cut those hinge slots in the door and did a trial fitting. And at that stage, I knew I was slightly tight along here and slightly tight at the top. So I've made some adjustments, and that now fits just as I want it. And with all these things, you've got to allow for expansion and contraction. I'm hoping that I'm not going to get any serious expansions or contractions with this one, but we shall see. Next, I do the lock. So that's the shed door. The lock is fitted now, and all I've got to do now is put a bit of door stop on the inside of the frame that the door then shuts against. But the lock is fitted, works very nicely. Good. Many thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.